Hello, and welcome to the coding tutorial for Cupid's bow and the Love Brew. If you want to see these items in action, then you can click the link in the description down below to watch the showcase video, or you can skip ahead to the end of this video where a link will appear on screen which will lead to that same video. But otherwise, let's get right into it. Starting off here is the code for the bow with the name, lore, and unique enchant ID. It's also unbreakable, which we'll hide in the bow's tooltip. I'm also going to be making a special kind of arrow that you'll need to use in conjunction with the bow in order to make the mobs that you hit with it fall in love. So next line here are those very arrows which I'm calling attraction bolts. And you can still use normal arrows with the bow, but they just won't cause mobs to fall in love. And then last we've got the lingering love potion, which I'm calling the Love Brew. We've got the name, lore, enchant as usual, and its potion effect will be water, meaning the potion will have no effect in terms of like Minecraft's library of effects, like strength or swiftness for example. And having the potion effect set to water will allow us to give the potion the exact custom color we want, which you can see here in custom potion color by this numerical value. And I've decided to go with a pink color since it's obviously very Valentine's-y. And then down here are our variables for today, as well as a team that we'll be needing later, in which I've set its collision roll to never. These weapons are going to work on all mobs that we come across, however I don't want them to affect any non-mob entities such as armor stands, minecarts, paintings, or anything like that. I mean, I know llama spit needs to be loved too, but it just, doesn't really make sense for what we're doing here. So all of these non-mob entities, of which there are a lot by the way, will be tagged with can't love. Next up is taking care of tracking players who have the bow, arrows, or the potion currently equipped. Here, an objective called Cupid Bow Own will be set to 0 for all players, which will then be overwritten and set to 1 instead, as long as a player has the bow in either their currently selected hotbar slot or in their offhand. And then for the arrows and the potion, we have almost the exact same setup, with the only two exceptions being that instead of using set, I'm using remove on the first line, which just has to do with the fact that these items are consumables and are taken away from you on use. And I'm also setting the two of these to 2 instead of 1 as I do here. And I'll explain these things more when the time comes, but for now I'll just leave it at that. To give the arrows fired from this bow the power to make mobs fall in love, I'm going to be applying special tags to them to differentiate them from normal arrow projectiles. But before we do that, all arrows will be given the tag in air if their data tag in ground is equal to 0. This tag is removed once an arrow hits and sticks into a block, which is to prevent arrows that have already landed from receiving the special tag instead of the arrow we're firing, which would then result in us wasting one of our attraction bolts. When a player who has Cupid's bow and the attraction bolts equipped has 1 in bow used, meaning they've just fired an arrow, that player will target the nearest entity that has a tag in air, which will only target airborne arrows, and whose value in pickup is 1, tagging it with Love Arrow. Having 1 in pickup just means that the arrow has been fired by a player in survival or adventure mode, and not by a player in creative mode or, more importantly, by a skeleton. Then bow used is set back to 0 so the line above doesn't run infinitely as long as you have the bow and arrows equipped. Next we'll be giving the Love Brew the exact same treatment, tagging any of these we throw with a special tag, which will grant them special effects. A player who has the potion equipped with 1 in potion used, which means they just threw a potion, will tag the nearest thrown potion with Love Brew 1, the number 1 being there because it has just entered the first out of 2 stages it'll go through. Then potion used is set back to 0. And going back up here for a quick second, I have remove here instead of set because consumable items can be a little bit tricky when we're trying to determine if the player has used them. Take the Love Brew for example. In order for this tag to be applied, I must be an owner of the potion and have just used one. But that's actually a little bit contradictory, because if I use one, I'll have 1 in potion used, but because potions don't stack by more than 1, my hand will actually be empty, which technically means that I'm no longer an owner, and this means that Love Brew Own will be set to 0 and this tag won't be applied. So the code just needs some time to recognize that we did have the item in question, but that we just used it. So by using remove instead of set, when we use the potion, Love Brew Own will tick down to 1, and then we can apply the tag successfully, and then it'll count down past 0. And this small window of time is just enough to do what we need without applying the tag to more than 1 thrown potion. And the same concept applies to the arrows we made as well, if you only have 1 left in your hand. With that, we'll move on to the various effects that our arrows will have. All love arrows will leave a trail of hearts behind them as they fly through the air, and should they ever hit the ground, they'll receive the tag Love Arrow in ground and then be killed off. And of course, if one of these arrows hits a mob, then that mob will fall in love. Now, technically, to the best of my knowledge, at least, There isn't a way to directly detect if a mob has been hit by an arrow with a certain tag. However, what we can do is make a rough approximation if it has happened. So we can detect if a love arrow is within a certain range of a mob, and we can also detect if a mob has been hurt using the data tag hurt time, meaning that if a mob detects a love arrow nearby and then takes damage, we can guess that the damage it took was from that arrow. So executing from all love arrows, they will target all entities who aren't players, who don't have the tag can't love, and who are within a radius of 4 blocks, setting their score in near love arrow to 2, which will constantly decrease by 1. Using the data tag hurt time, we can determine whether a mob has been hurt or not. If a mob has just been hurt, they'll be given the tag is hurt. If they haven't just been hurt, this tag will instead be removed. Then, a mob with at least 1 in near love arrow, who's tagged with is hurt, and whose score in love is at most 0, will have their score in love set to 200. Next, we'll code out the effects for our love brew. Before, if you remember, we tag the potion with love brew 1 once it's thrown by the player. Down here, running from an entity tagged with love brew 1, it'll summon an armor stand tagged with Love Gary and Can't Love, who is small, indivisible, and has all of its item slots disabled. Next, we'll add the tag Love Brew 2 to the thrown potion and remove the tag Love Brew 1 to indicate that it has spawned the armor stand already and that it doesn't need to do it anymore. And then using the new tag Love Brew 2, we'll constantly teleport the closest Love Gary within a radius of 3 to 1 block above the potion, causing the stand to follow the potion's throwing arc. And now, truth be told, I actually had some confusion with this next part, and I think that's because I may have come across some kind of bug. So the idea here is that once the potion hits something, it'll be destroyed, and that'll cause the armor stand to fall to the ground since the potion can't teleport it around anymore. Its data tag on ground would become 1, and it would receive the tag Love Gary on ground, causing it to summon an area effect cloud on the spot it landed, which is the same spot where the potion impacted. The cloud is tagged with Love Cloud and Can't Love, will last for 10 seconds, has a radius of 2, and uses hard particles. And then, having done its job, the armor stand would be killed off. But curiously, I found that having this tag be applied when on ground is 1 doesn't seem to work for some reason. What winds up happening, if we test this, is that the cloud is immediately spawned in the air as soon as the potion is thrown. And after some fiddling, I discovered that this has to be 0 instead. And it works that way, which is great. Except the thing is, that implies that the armor stand must be in the air for it to receive the tag and spawn the cloud. However, if we test this out, it actually works this way. And I'm not really sure why. And I've looked this up and down a whole bunch of times, and maybe I'm just being completely oblivious to something, but I'm not really sure why this is working. And now one thing I did notice is that if the armor stand isn't being teleported to the potion, then on-ground seems to go back to functioning as it normally should. So if I change this to 1 and then summon in the armor stand on its own without teleporting it to anything, it works. And if I summon it in and TP it to me and then let it go, that works too. So, as far as I can tell, something kind of weird is going on here, but I'm not really sure what. And again, maybe I'm overlooking something or other, but I'm just not sure anymore. So if you know what's going on, then please feel free to let me know in the comments. This just had me really confused for a while when I was trying to code this out. But luckily, we can put this at 0 and it'll work. So we'll just leave it at that and kind of take what we can get. So, all that aside, once the potion lands and the armor stand creates the cloud, this line will run from the cloud, targeting all entities with at most 0 in love, who are not tagged with Can't Love, aren't players, and who are within 2 blocks, setting their score in love to 200, just like the arrows do. And in love will decrease by 1 every tick. Now let's handle what happens to mobs who are in love. To show that a mob has fallen in love, heart particles will appear on them. They'll also have their AI taken away, which will turn off that mob's normal AI behaviors, such as a zombie looking at and chasing after villagers, or skeletons running from wolves. And I'm doing this just because I kind of like the idea of them being immobilized by love and not really caring about those things like they normally would. So now what we're looking to do is have a way for 2 mobs in love to pathfind their way to each other. When you breed 2 animals together, they move towards each other so they can create a baby animal. So we'll hijack this AI to make it look like 2 mobs in love are moving towards each other on their own. When a mob falls in love, they'll spawn a chicken on themselves, which will be silent, invulnerable, will have their data tag in love set to 10,000, which, by the way, isn't to be confused with the objective in love that we're using, and it'll be tagged with Love Chicken and Can't Love. Here we'll make it permanently invisible, and we'll have it teleport the nearest mob in love within a radius of 1 to its position and rotation. And because the mob in love is always teleported to the chicken, this gives the chicken full control over where the love mob goes. So, if 2 of these chickens are near each other, they'll begin to move in closer in an attempt to breed, bringing along their love mobs. And then when they get up close, an explosion will be generated. To prevent the love mob and the chicken from pushing each other around due to their intersecting colliders, both will be placed on the team love, which has collision turned completely off for its team members. Once a mob isn't in love anymore, they'll then be taken off this team so they can collide with other entities again. To get the explosion to happen, we'll execute from all love mobs to add 1 to near love mob for all love mobs within 3 blocks, which includes itself. This line here will remove 1 from near love mob, which will result in a consistent score of 1 in near love mob for all mobs in love. That is, unless they get close to another love mob. If 2 love mobs approach each other, then they'll add an additional 1 to each other's scores in near love mob, which will bring it up to 2, and then, executing from all entities with at least 2 in near love mob, they'll each summon a creeper on themselves, which is set to explode immediately. And then for some special effects, I'm also having a fireworks rocket summoned on each of them as well, which will also explode immediately, creating some pleasant red and pink particles with a white trail. Some additional hard particles will generate around the both of them in a somewhat wide radius, and should they survive the explosion, their score in love will be set to 1, which will then count down to 0, preventing them from generating more than 1 explosion per time they fall in love. And they'll also get their AI back as well, which will allow them to move around and function normally again. Finally here, the love chicken will be despawned once the mob that spawned it is no longer in love, or no longer exists in the game world. In the case of no longer being in love, the mob will teleport the closest love chicken into the void once its score in love is exactly 0. To detect whether the mob still exists, we'll execute from all entities with at least 1 in love to set the score of near host to 1 for the closest love chicken in a radius of 1. Should the mob not exist anymore, they won't be able to execute this line anymore to keep near host at 1, and this line will set it to 0. And then a love chicken with 0 in near host will then be sent to the void. And either way this plays out, a love chicken with 0 in near host will be killed. So that works, and that's good, though there is a small issue, that being that if we cause a mob to fall in love with the bow, and then nearby we give a chicken some seeds, as if we were trying to breed it, that chicken and the love chicken on the love mob would then move into breed and would successfully create a baby chicken. I don't want the love chickens to actually breed, and this is never a problem when it's just between 2 love chickens, because the explosion that's created by the love mobs disrupts the chicken's attempt to make a baby, cutting off the process before it's completed, and then despawning them because their corresponding host was either killed by the explosion, or at the very least is no longer in love. In the case of a normal chicken and a love chicken, there is no explosion because there's only 1 love mob present, which allows the chickens to breed successfully. Which, on top of not being what I want, it is a bit silly to see a baby chicken pop out between 2 mobs that are generally not known to breed with the other. So to stop a love chicken from breeding with normal chickens, we'll have ready to breed set to 1 for all chickens whose value in the data tag in love is greater than 0. Then executing from all normal chickens with at least 1 in ready to breed, they'll execute from all love chickens within 4 blocks to alter the entity data of all chickens within 4 blocks, changing their values of the data tag in love to 0. This affects not only regular chickens, but love chickens as well, but we need to make the love chicken be in love again, otherwise it won't be able to pathfind its way to other love chickens to cause an explosion. So here we'll change the entity data of all love chickens with 0 in ready to breed, putting their data tag in love back up to a value of 10,000, and then they'll be able to function as normal. So an unfortunate aspect of the way we're doing things here is that technically a mob doesn't need to be hit by a love arrow in order to fall in love. Our parameters dictate that a mob only has to be near a love arrow when it has just been hurt, and this means that a mob could take damage from some alternate source, and then if a love arrow just happens to be nearby at the exact right moment, then they'll fall in love. Definitely not what I want to happen, so we're going to do our best to prevent mobs from falsely falling in love this way. And we can do that by disallowing mobs to fall in love for a brief period of time if they've taken damage from an alternate source. Going back up here for a second, I'm adding an extra parameter a mob must meet in order for them to detect that a love arrow is nearby. that being that their score in an objective called taking alt damage must be at most 0. Then here we'll be removing 1 from taking alt damage for all entities, and then here we have a variety of alternate damage sources. This first bit deals with damage from various environmental sources. This line makes it so that mobs can't fall in love while they're in the air, and that's because they'll take damage when they hit the ground. So as long as they're falling, taking alt damage will remain at 20. Then when they've hit the ground, this value will decrease by 1 every tick, meaning that after they land, at least 1 second must pass before they'll be able to fall in love, and this will ensure that the damage didn't come from the fall, but from the love arrow. Then we have a similar setup with drowning damage, just replacing the data tag on ground with air instead. With suffocation damage, an entity who finds themselves inside a block that is in air will be given the tag in block, and all entities with that tag will have taking alt damage set to 20. Then next, this section handles being in the vicinity of different damaging entities. If a mob finds themselves within range of these various entities, they won't be able to fall in love, because they are anticipating that they might take damage from one of these sources. All of these are just about the same, so I won't go through each of these individually, other than 2 small exceptions at the bottom. So snowballs generally don't cause damage to mobs, however they do actually cause a little bit of damage to blazes, so I'm accounting for these as a damage source as well, exclusively for blazes. And falling anvils also cause damage, however they don't have a specific in-game type as other entities do, so we just need to take a line to tag these anvils with falling anvil, and then proceed as we normally do. This last section handles taking damage from touching hazardous blocks. This first one is pretty easy because magma blocks only cause damage to a mob if they're standing directly on top of it. Other damage sources aren't quite as simple just because they can cause damage from multiple directions, meaning that we have to account for any direction the damaging block could be, which includes diagonals. For cactus and fire blocks, it's not so bad, but for lava, well, not so much. And that's because lava has a whole bunch of different block states it could be in, and we can't just generically detect lava with this command. We have to specify a block state, and with 16 different states it could be in, combined with accounting for multiple directions the lava block could be, this results in quite a few lines here. It's not the greatest, but it's also not the worst thing either, just a bunch of copying and pasting and then changing around the relative x, y, and z values. And with that should account for most types of alternate damage. There are some types I can't really do anything about, such as if a mob is taking damage from potion effects like poison or wither, or if a mob takes damage from a player via a melee attack or ranged bow attack. And along the same lines, there is one more issue that I want to try to take care of. When arrows hit mobs, they're destroyed, but because a mob can potentially fall in love without getting hit directly by an arrow, that means the arrow won't be consumed, and that one single arrow could be used to make multiple mobs fall in love, which I also don't want to happen. So to try to eliminate that possibility as best I can, I'm going to be adding this line here, which executes from a mob that has just fallen in love to kill the nearest love arrow within a radius of 4 blocks. This way, if a mob does falsely fall in love, it'll at least have the ability to destroy the arrow and prevent getting more out of that arrow than was intended. Truthfully, I do wish it was a bit more airtight than this, but I think that's about as good as I can make it as is. And with that, we're all done. So sorry this video didn't come out quite when I said, just took me a little bit longer than I had hoped initially to put it all together and whatnot. But again, if you'd like to check out the 2 of these weapons in action, then you can click right here to head on over to the showcase video where I show off what they can do, and if you want to grab them for yourself, then you can find a download for them in the description. And you can like, subscribe, or do whatever it is you wish to do, and I will see you next time.